In this presentation, we're going to be talking about the new Bloom's taxonomy. The new Bloom's taxonomy is a common way of referring to what is actually a revision of Bloom's original taxonomy of educational objectives. This is a project that began in the mid-1990s and culminated in the book that you see in this picture here, A Taxonomy for Learning, Teaching, and Assessing. We're going to be looking at this to see how we can use this to decide what to teach, how to teach it, how to measure it, and how to align teaching and assessment. Our goals are to understand the structure of the new Bloom's taxonomy and to analyze how it can be used to plan, teach, and assess music instruction in particular. Let's go back and look at a little bit of history. In 1948, Benjamin Bloom and a team of other educators came together to develop what is known as the Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, the classification of educational goals, and in this first case, those goals pertain to the cognitive domain. As you can see, one of the co-authors of the cognitive domain taxonomy was David Krathwohl. David eventually became the lead author on the taxonomy of educational objectives in the affective domain. Most music educators have come across this book and may have studied it in great detail during their studies and maybe in the process of creating curriculum and instruction. It's very popular and it has been highly influential in the development of music curriculum. There is also a third taxonomy, a taxonomy of the psychomotor domain. This was put together by, the particular picture you see here is the taxonomy developed by Anita Haro. I happen to like that particular taxonomy, but there are actually two others that have been developed by other educators. And note that the original team is not involved or was not involved in the psychomotor domain. The old framework was broken into three areas: the cognitive domain, which dealt with knowledge acquisition and intellectual skills, and broke knowledge down into, or the cognitive domain down into knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. The affective domain dealt with feelings, emotions, attitudes, and mindset, and was broken down into 5 categories, beginning with receiving and moving up to responding, valuing, organizing, and characterizing. The psychomotor domain deals with coordinated physical and manipulative activities and procedures, and this particular taxonomy begins with reflex movements as basic movements and moves up to basic fundamental movements from there, then into perceptual abilities, physical abilities, and skilled movements. The original cognitive domain is often portrayed as a pyramid. This is easily accessible on the internet. You've probably seen it. On the bottom are what's called lots, or lower order thinking skills, and up towards the top are higher order thinking skills, or HOTS. The theory is that we need lots of lower order thinking skills if we're going to get to the good stuff, the hot stuff, up there in the higher order thinking skill domains. Anyway, since 1948, a lot has happened in education. We've moved towards standards-based education. There has been an infusion of constructivist philosophy into educational practice. Comprehensive musicianship has been infused into many school programs. Other theorists have developed taxonomies. Many of them are very popular. You may well have encountered some of those in your own professional development or classwork. For example, there's a taxonomy by Marzano that is very popular. There are theories of multiple intelligences that change the way we think about cognitive knowledge. There have been tremendous advances in neuroscience. There has been a huge upheaval as a result of technology and this sense that we need to teach new 21st century skills to our students. There has also been advances in understanding procedural learning and the thought that art is in motion, and the way we learn art and engage in procedural learning is different from the way we engage in cognitive knowledge. And then there has been tremendous advances in understanding metacognition, that is, the way we know about our own knowing, the way we learn to learn. This would include the role of feeling and emotion in all behavior and the idea of grit. So, not surprisingly, many educators felt that there was a need for a revision. So, a team of authors came together. Of the original team, the only one who is still alive and working is David Crathwell. So, he was a part of this new team. This team went through the old three taxonomies, infused the 50 plus years of research that have gone on since the creation of that original taxonomy to create the new taxonomy for learning, teaching, and assessing. The new taxonomy is not conceived of in the pyramidal sort of way that we were looking at before, but more as a grid. And as you can see, across the top, there is a cognitive process dimension. You can see that there is remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating across the top. These are active verbs and thought to be processes that a person can move back and forth between. The old conception put knowledge as a static area at the bottom of the pyramid, and now it is conceived of as remembering. Comprehension is now conceived of as understanding, an active process. Application is now thought of as applying. Notice, by the way, the doing aspect of all of these things. Analysis is considered analyzing. Synthesis is actually reconceptualized as creating and placed at the top of the new domain, whereas evaluation, that used to be at the top of the old pyramid, has, I suppose we can think of it as sinking down to second place in the new cognitive processes. An important point to remember is that the cognitive processes, as they're laid out here, are not rigidly sequential. And in fact, analyzing, creating, evaluating those higher order thinking skills can be used explicitly to teach remembering, understanding, or applying. Perhaps the more innovative, or the most innovative feature of the new taxonomy is the development of knowledge dimensions. And these were very carefully selected after a great deal of consideration of possible knowledge dimensions. If you want to read more about that, find the expanded version of the taxonomy. And you can read you can read about the history of this in great detail. Anyway, 4 areas have been conceived as dynamic areas of knowledge, and it's thought that a person will be moving between these four areas at any given time, and learning requires perhaps all four of these areas to be in play at any given time. Anyway, factual and conceptual knowledge is very similar to the old cognitive domain, not much new there. But procedural learning is now infused directly into the conception of the taxonomy. It's thought that everything has an action or a procedural aspect associated with it, and this new conception captures that idea. Perhaps the most innovative aspect of the new taxonomy is the inclusion of metacognitive knowledge, the ability of an individual to regulate oneself, to build grit, to grow, consciously grow and develop and practice, is thought to be all part of metacognition. And the team recognized the importance of the learner in the learning process. This is very much in line with the constructivist thinking processes and a philosophy, I should say, and very much aligned with what we know about the importance of self-regulation and deliberate practice and learning. I think it's also worth thinking a little bit more about procedural learning. This is the stuff of which music performance is made up of. And it's interesting to think of some of the things that characterize procedural learning. Certainly, procedural learning involves the development of skills, actions, procedures, and habits. But it's important to remember, actions are non-declarative. That is, we can talk all we want about playing the piano, but unless we play the piano, we really can't quite describe it. There's also an unconscious aspect to motor learning. For example, sleep and rest are really important. Mindful repetition is important. Playfulness is very important in the early stages of procedural learning. In fact, Gary McPherson has coined the idea, the expression deliberate play, as being a necessity. In he has a theory that this is a necessity in the developing musician. There's also a slow acquisition of procedural learning and then a long retention. It's like riding a bike. It takes a long time to learn it, but once you get it, you get it. It's also a phased process. We reach a plateau in our learning, then we need to rest. We come back and we can usually, with a little bit of practice, hit that plateau again and then move on a little bit further and then rest. The idea of continually reaching a plateau, stepping back, and then going up a little bit higher is important. Imitation plays an essential role in procedural learning. Our mirror neuron system is activated. We need models. And it's very important to measure baseline skill. A skill after acquisition has occurred. It's one thing to learn it after a 5-minute practice session, but if it's learned well, mindfully, it's more likely to be retained and then transferred. So we need to be able to do that with procedural learning. The new taxonomy does give us a way of classifying this behavior, I believe. And then metacognition. This is very much related to self-regulated learning, which is a key predictor of success versus struggle and failure in instrumental music education. For more on that, read the research by Gary McPherson. I've noted a few of these on the slide. It's also an attribute of successful musicians, although it is active and highly variable among musicians. It's very closely related to the idea of grit and to a growth mindset. And social and emotional learning is an important aspect of the way we think about what we're doing. David Crathwell, who was the lead author on the affective domain, talks about the fact that he now believes that emotion and feeling is a part of metacognition and that it's infused into everything that a person does as they're trying to learn something. And so that's why he no longer separates it into a separate handbook. It's part of learning anything. So here, let's just take a very simple musical goal. We all want our students to assume posture that's erect and relaxed when they're playing their instruments or when they're singing. So we don't want too much tension, but we want good alignment. So how could we spin this out if we were looking at the taxonomy as a way of guiding all the different kinds of learnings that could go on pertaining to this? So starting up here at the upper right-hand corner, we have some factual knowledge that a student needs to engage in, and they just simply need to remember that posture is an element of good playing. I don't know about you, but I walk into many schools and it's always a surprise to me to see how many kids are slumped down in their chairs, are playing with crossed legs, are holding their instruments in the oddest ways. Anyway, just remembering to do what you're supposed to do is part of this. Conceptual knowledge pertains to perhaps at the stage of remembering the physiology of body alignment, and then at some level you move into understanding how tension impedes good tone. There are certainly more ideas that you could apply further down into the taxonomy. At the procedural level, the learner needs to be able to perhaps repeat the elements of good posture when holding a particular instrument, or the steps to good posture. Perhaps they would demonstrate understanding by comparing examples of poor and good posture, or to apply this by actually playing a selection while maintaining appropriate posture. As you can see, we live in the realm of applying quite a bit, but that remembering and understanding is a large part of what we do too. Just carrying through the procedural level, one more step, at the analysis level, a student might observe a professional and dissect their posture, describe what they're seeing and doing. And at the evaluation level, they might teach and assess a student's posture using a particular set of criteria that either were given to them or they developed themselves. And then finally, at the creation level or the creating level, they could create a video illustrating the principles of good posture on various instruments. Now, I'm just making this up, but I think you get the point that you can use the taxonomy as a guide to coming up with a grasp on all the different ways that a person actually needs to go about knowing a particular topic. At the metacognitive level, the student knows that they need to remember to check posture and tension during practice. They remember to check for these things, and maybe they make notes to themselves. They may understand that they have a habit of slumping when feet are not planted on the ground. So just knowing that and understanding that they have a habit is a step in the right direction. At the application level, the student may make a point of deliberately relaxing every time she pauses during practice. At the analysis level, she would analyze the weight and balance of an instrument to find optimal position. And then moving up at the evaluation level, she's evaluating the success of her strategies for staying relaxed during a performance. And that's the key element here. She knows what she has to do. And finally, perhaps she has a very complex piece, for her anyway, to play. And so she makes a little script with points to remember. It's specific places within the piece to remember. Relax, go into a particular change your body posture and alignment. So again, these are just ideas. It's a way of thinking through what a student needs to know and be able to do about a particular goal. So here's a summary of the major points in this presentation. The new Bloom's taxonomy brings together the old domains of cognitive, affective, and psychomotor learning into one coherent taxonomy. It recognizes the active role of cognitive processes and recognizes the importance of metacognition in learning. The final point, if you're uncomfortable about giving up the old affective domain, then by all means continue using it. Finally, there are a few handouts that are prepared and available to you on the site. Please download them because they go into more detail about how to assess different elements within the taxonomy. Bye-bye.